So, this will be point number 6 on his list. Let us get to the video.
Number 6. Genesis 2:4. Young Earth Creationists often argue that Genesis 2 is a recap of what takes place on day 6 within Genesis 1, when God made humans. But Genesis 2:4 poses a problem for suggesting this chapter is a recap. The verse begins with, "These are the generations of the heavens and the earth when they were created." This is what scholars call a toledoth, and it is used throughout Genesis, almost like chapter markers for the ancient audience. However, when this phrase is used, it always introduces what comes after the person or the generations that follow him. It is never used to denote a recap of something that happened prior to this.
Okay. This is actually very true. I've actually read about the Toledoth. I read a theory that Genesis originally was written by multiple authors, and that each time you see this, these are the generations, or what he calls the Toledoth, that is an indication of a new author adding on to the existing record. In this particular case, according to this theory, Genesis 1 was written by God, and starting in Genesis chapter 2, verse 4, where we have that phrase, "These are the generations," this is Adam beginning his record. And so the one is written from the point of view of God, the other is written from the point of view of Adam. Now, this is very possible. He does state that the Toledoth always recounts what happens after the person. That is partly true, but it is partly in error, because it frequently is a overlapping. So, for instance, in Genesis 10, we have that same phrase when we talk about the generations of Shem. In Genesis 10, verse 1, "Now these are the generations of the sons of Noah." It then goes through and lists all the sons of Noah and all their families, right? And then chapter 11 has the tale of the Tower of Babel. In chapter 11, verse 10, "These are the generations of Shem." Shem was 100 years old and begat Arphaxad 2 years after the flood. Okay. Then in verse 27, "Now these are the generations of Terah." The difficulty here is Shem was alive when the Tower of Babel took place. And yet, we have this phrase, "These are the generations of Shem," after the story of the Tower of Babel. And it's actually very true. If you look at the timeline, it is very likely that even Abraham was alive at the time that the Tower of Babel event happened. So it's not a recap. It is a different story, but not necessarily of a different time period. So in chapter 10 and the beginning of chapter 11, this is a section that, according to the theory that I mentioned, is written by Noah, where he is recording things. He's recording kind of his posterity, his sons' families, and then he tells of the event of the Tower of Babel. Then Shem contributes his record, in which he details his own descendants down to Terah. And then when we have this next change in verse 27, "These are the generations of Terah," this is Abraham beginning to write his portion of the record. But these portions still overlap in time, but they do detail what happened in the generations that follow. So the generations of the sons of Noah tell the story of all 3 sons. The generations of Shem tell only the story of the descendants of Shem. The generations of Terah tell the story of the descendants of Terah. Each time a new author is beginning to contribute, according to the theory. So, going back to the creation, if we take this view, Then chapter 1 is God's account of the creation, and then chapter 2 is Adam's account of the creation. They can still overlap in time. They are just told from different perspectives. And we still follow the same standard usage of the Toledoth. It all works very nicely. So the fact that there is a Toledoth here means nothing to the young creation, young earth belief. But let us continue.
Biblical scholar John Walton notes that the phrase in Genesis 2 is probably teaching the same idea, and that what takes place in Genesis 2 is meant to be a sequel, not a recap of what happens in Genesis 1. After God establishes the cosmos, he then hones in on one region on the earth to create a garden environment. But this would mean what is commonly viewed as the creation of the first man in Genesis 2 is not actually the creation of the first man. Since in the prequel to Genesis 2, God elects all humans to be his image, and this would take place before Genesis 2 and before Adam is believed to have been created from dust. Scholars like Michael Heiser note Genesis 1 speaks of encompassing all of humanity, not just one man or one couple, implying when God made man in his image, it was meant to include all humans, wherever they were existing at that time. Then Genesis 2 picks up after this with the creation or election of two specific individuals to act as priests in the Garden of Eden. So because of the Toledoth in Genesis 2, the implication is Adam came after, when all humanity was made in the image of God, and therefore was not the first human. Number 5.
That's not what it's saying at all, and I don't even get... Well, I understand what they're trying to say, but as I explained, the Toledoth does not mean a sequel. It simply means a new account has begun. And you can see this in the fact that the Toledoths that are used are most often used for an overlapping period of time. But I will point this out also. See, this is where LDS beliefs solve problems. Because here, chapter 2, verse 5. We just read the account of the creation of chapter 1, right? Everything was created. But in verse 5 it says, "And every plant of the field before it was in the earth, and every herb of the field before it grew, for the Lord had not caused it to rain upon the earth, and there was not a man to till the ground." So what do we see? Didn't we just have the creation where God put everything on the earth? But it says here, generations of the heavens and earth, when they were created, in the day that God made the earth and the heavens, and every plant before it was on the earth. See, this is an indication of what we believe is the pre-mortal or spirit creation of all things. In a sense, chapter 1 is detailing a spiritual creation in which God is preparing a planet for life. But he has not yet brought life to the planet. He has simply prepared it, because he has created everything in the spirit, but not yet physically. And then in chapter 2, we get the physical creation of life. And that is why we have the description in chapter 2 of God breathing the breath of life into Adam. And he becomes a living soul. Because before that, the breath of life is an idiom for the spirit. And he becomes a living soul when the spirit, which was previously created, is placed inside the physical body, which is now created. And this is also why we have things in a somewhat different order in chapter 2, because in chapter 1, he is preparing things spiritually, and in chapter 2, prepared it spiritually before it was in the earth, as it says in verse 5, and then he makes it physically. Now you'll also note that God, in chapter 2, God creates Adam even before he creates the garden. So in verse 7, and the Lord God formed man of the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life. And then it's in verse 8, and the Lord God planted a garden eastward in Eden. Man was the first physical life that God placed on the earth. That is what the Bible says. The spirit creation and premortal existence is all through the Bible, really. We read in Ecclesiastes that the spirit returns to God who gave it. And Paul in the New Testament tells us that we are the offspring of deity, that he is the father of our spirits. And the first life that God placed on this earth, the first physical life, was his own children, or at least the first man to be brought. That was Adam. Then he places a garden, he grows the plants, then he brings the animals for Adam to name. That is what's going on here. It is not a creation of all people in physical, mortal flesh. It is a creation of spirits, and then a creation of the physical. Anyways, pausing again.